She had been working at the hotel for almost 3 years, and most people never noticed her beyond a polite thank you or a quick nod as she served drinks and cleared tables at expensive events. She was known among the staff as quiet, reliable, and kind, someone who always arrived early and stayed late without complaint. Her name was known on the schedule board, but rarely spoken by guests, because in places like this the staff blended into the background like furniture and soft music. That evening, the luxury event filled the grand ballroom with crystal lights, elegant dresses, and low conversations. The guests were wealthy, confident, and relaxed, the kind of people who were used to being impressed and rarely surprised. She moved through the room in her simple black uniform, carrying trays with steady hands. Her posture was calm, but inside she felt something different, because every time she walked past the piano at the front of the room, her heart felt heavier. The piano was a beautiful grand instrument, polished to a mirror shine. It had been placed there for decoration more than use, and no performer was scheduled for the night. She noticed it early while setting the tables, and felt the familiar pull. She always tried to ignore. Music had been part of her life long before she ever wore an apron, but life had taken her in a different direction. Bills, family responsibilities, and missed chances had slowly pushed her dreams into a quiet corner of her heart. As a child, she used to play for hours sitting on a worn bench in a small apartment. Her mother would listen while doing chores, and her neighbors sometimes knocked just to say the music made their evenings better. She learned without formal lessons, copying melodies by ear and practicing whenever she could. But when her mother became ill, music turned into a luxury she could no longer afford. She took jobs early, worked hard, and told herself that playing piano was something meant for another version of her life. Now, standing in the ballroom, she felt that old version stir again. Each time she passed the piano, she imagined the sound echoing through the room. She imagined the weight of the keys, the warmth of the wood, and the way music once made her feel understood without words. She shook the thoughts away, reminding herself why she was there. She was working, and nothing more. The event continued with speeches, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. At one point, there was a brief lull when the main speaker stepped away, and the room fell into a softer, quieter rhythm. Guests waited, standing or seated, talking among themselves. The piano sat untouched under the lights, and for reasons she could not fully explain, she stopped walking. Her hands felt cold, and her breath slowed. She looked around, checking if anyone was watching. Most guests were distracted, and the event staff was busy near the back. Her manager had stepped out to take a call for a moment. She told herself to keep moving, but something stronger than fear held her in place. She thought about how long it had been since she last played. Years had passed, and yet she could still feel the music inside her like a language she never forgot. She knew she might get in trouble. She knew this was not her place, but she also knew that moments like this rarely came twice. She walked closer to the piano, her steps slow and unsure. Her heart beat loudly in her ears. She imagined the guests turning and judging her. She imagined being asked to leave, but she also imagined silence turning into something beautiful. She reached the bench and gently pulled it back. The sound caught the attention of a few people who glanced over with mild curiosity. She did not look at them. She sat down, straightened her apron, and placed her hands just above the keys. For a second, she closed her eyes, not for drama, but to steady herself. Her fingers trembled as they touched the piano. The instrument felt familiar and distant, at the same time like meeting an old friend after many years. She took a breath and began to play. The first notes were soft and careful, almost testing the space. The sound floated through the room, surprising those nearby. Conversations slowly faded. Chairs stopped moving. Heads turned one by one. People realized something unexpected was happening. As she continued, the music grew stronger and more confident. Her hands remembered what her mind feared. It had lost. The melody carried warmth, sadness, and hope woven together naturally. She was no longer a waitress in that moment. She was simply someone telling a story through sound. Her face showed focus and quiet emotion, not performance, but honesty. She did not look up. She did not smile. She played as she always had, for herself, for her memories, and for the feeling of being alive in a way that words never allowed. The room changed. People leaned forward. Some stood, still holding glasses mid-air. Others felt a strange lump in their throats, without knowing why. The piano filled the space completely. Yet gently, it did not demand attention, it earned it. By the time the first part of the piece ended, the entire ballroom was silent. Every eye was on her, and no one dared to interrupt what had just begun. The silence that followed her playing did not feel empty. It felt full, like the room was holding its breath together. She could sense it without looking up. The air felt heavier, warmer, closer. The piano responded easily under her hands, and with each movement her confidence grew, not from pride, but from familiarity. It felt like returning home after a long journey and realizing the door had never truly closed. She continued playing, letting the melody flow naturally without forcing it. The music carried gentle rises and falls like waves that knew exactly where they were going. Even those who had never cared for piano music before found themselves drawn in, because this was not about skill alone. It was about feeling something real was happening, and everyone in the room could sense it. A man near the front lowered his glass slowly, afraid the sound might break if he moved too quickly. A woman beside him pressed her hand to her chest. Without realizing she had done it, conversations had completely stopped. The soft lighting now seemed brighter, not because it had changed, but because the room itself had become more Among the guests were people who had attended countless concerts and private performances. They had heard famous musicians and polished professionals. Yet this felt different. There was no stage, no introduction, no expectation, just a woman in a service uniform pouring something deeply personal into the air through sound. She shifted into another passage, and the tone became more emotional, not louder, but richer, carrying hints of longing and quiet strength. Her shoulders relaxed, and her breathing steadied. She was no longer thinking about who was watching or what might happen next. She was thinking about her mother, about late evenings and dim lamps, about practicing quietly so neighbors would not complain about noise. Memories guided her hands. Without effort, she played notes she had not touched in years, yet they felt waiting, ready. She realized then that music had never left her life. It had simply been waiting patiently for her to return. At the edge of the room, her manager had come back inside and froze mid-step. Confusion crossed his face as he tried to understand what was happening. He recognized her uniform and felt a rush of concern mixed with disbelief. Yet he did not interrupt. Something in the room told him this moment was not meant to be stopped. Staff members paused where they stood, holding trays and watching quietly. Some exchanged glances, unsure whether they were allowed to enjoy this or if they should intervene. But none of them moved. They felt the same pull as the guests. The pianist felt a shift in the music, as if it were asking for more honesty. She leaned slightly closer to the keys and allowed more emotion to surface. Her fingers moved faster, then slower, shaping the sound with care. The melody spoke of struggle and hope, of loss and endurance, without needing explanation. Tears formed in the eyes of a few listeners. One man wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by his reaction. Another woman smiled through emotion, feeling reminded of something she had lost long ago. The music touched places that polite conversation never reached. She reached a quiet section, and the sound softened to a whisper. The room leaned in closer, almost physically drawn toward the piano. Even the clinking of silverware from the kitchen had stopped. It was as if the building itself was listening. Her expression remained focused and calm, but inside she felt something release. A weight she had carried for years began to loosen. She realized she had been holding back not just music but a part of herself, and now that part was breathing again. As she played the final notes of the piece, she slowed naturally, allowing each sound to settle fully before moving on. The last chord faded gently into silence, and for a brief moment, no one reacted. That pause was not hesitation, but respect. The room needed time to catch up to what it had just experienced. Then someone near the back let out a quiet breath. Others followed. It was not applause, yet just recognition of something meaningful. A few seconds later, hands began to come together slowly. Then, with growing confidence, applause filled the room, not loud or wild, but sincere and full. She lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. For the first time, she looked out and saw faces she did not expect to see looking back at her with admiration and surprise. Some were smiling, some were emotional, all were focused on her. She stood slowly, unsure what to do next. Her instinct was to step away and return to her duties. But the energy in the room felt changed. The applause continued, growing warmer. More united people stood, without being prompted, drawn by appreciation rather than habit. Her manager finally stepped forward, not with anger, but with uncertainty. He looked at her, then at the guests, and realized this moment was bigger than rules or schedules. He nodded gently, giving permission without words. She gave a small, respectful bow, not as a performer, but as someone saying thank you for listening. Her heart raced again, but this time with a different feeling, not fear but possibility. As she stepped back from the piano, the room did not immediately return to normal. People whispered to each other, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Many asked who she was, how this could have happened. Some guests looked at the piano again, as if it had revealed a secret. She returned to the side of the room, holding her tray, but everything felt different. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were alive, buzzing with emotions she had not felt in years. She did not know what would come next, but she knew something had changed forever. The music had spoken and the room had listened, and that was only the beginning. When the applause finally settled, the room did not return to its earlier noise and movement. Instead, a new kind of energy spread quietly through the space. People spoke more softly and looked at her more openly, as if trying to place her into a new understanding. She felt those looks as she moved carefully between tables, resuming her work. Her role had not officially changed, yet everything felt altered in a way she could not explain. Several guests stopped her gently as she passed, asking simple questions like where she learned to play or how long she had been practicing. Their voices were respectful, almost cautious. As if they did not want to disturb something fragile, she answered politely, keeping her responses short, saying she learned when she was younger, and that she had not played in a long time. She did not know how to speak about music without exposing too much of herself, so she stayed close to facts and moved on. One older guest with kind eyes thanked her quietly, saying the music reminded him of someone he loved long ago. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. She listened and nodded, feeling both honored and overwhelmed. She realized that her playing had reached places in people she had never met, and that realization carried a weight she was not prepared for. Her manager watched her from a distance, noticing how guests reacted to her presence. There was no anger in his expression, only curiosity. And something close to pride. He had always known she was dependable. But now he saw her differently, as someone with a depth that went beyond her job description. He did not say anything yet, but his silence felt supportive rather than tense. As the event continued, people began asking if she would play again. Someone near the piano mentioned that the night felt incomplete without more music. Others agreed softly. But no one pressured her. She felt torn between a desire to disappear and a longing to return to the keys. The piano sat there quietly waiting, as if aware of the choice she was facing. In the kitchen area, staff members gathered, briefly whispering with excitement. Some had known she played before, but none had heard her like that. They smiled at her when she passed, offering subtle encouragement without words. She felt grateful for their support, but also exposed, as if something private had been revealed to the world. During a short break, she stepped into a quieter hallway to breathe. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from release. The moment had stirred memories she had carefully packed away years ago. She thought about the last time she played in front of anyone and how life had taken a different turn. Since then, she wondered if this was just a beautiful interruption, or the beginning of something she had been too afraid to imagine. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, briefly letting the echo of the piano fade inside her. She reminded herself that tomorrow she would return to her normal routine, serving tables, balancing bills, and moving forward as always. Yet a small voice inside her questioned that certainty. When she returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere felt warmer. People smiled more easily, and conversations felt lighter. Music played softly through speakers, but it lacked the presence of the piano. Guests glanced toward the instrument now and then, as if expecting it to speak again. Eventually, one of the event organizers approached her with a respectful tone. He thanked her for the unexpected performance, saying it had become the highlight of the evening. He asked gently if she would consider playing one more piece before the event ended, making it clear there was no obligation. She felt her heart race again and asked for a moment to think. She stood still, weighing her choice. Playing again meant stepping further into the spotlight, but walking away felt like closing a door she had just opened. She thought about fear and regret, and how often fear had guided her decisions. She also thought about the faces she had seen during the first performance, and how the music had connected them all. She nodded quietly, agreeing to play once more. The organizer smiled and thanked her sincerely. Words spread quickly through the room, not loudly, but through shared looks and whispered excitement. Guests began to settle again, drawn naturally toward the piano. As she approached the bench, this time her steps felt steadier. She adjusted the seat and placed her hands above the keys, taking a moment to center herself. She did not choose a complicated piece. Instead, she selected something simple and honest, something that reflected who she was in that moment. The first notes were gentle, carrying, calm rather than surprise. The room welcomed the sound like an old friend returning. She played with intention, allowing space between notes, letting the music breathe. The melody spoke of acceptance and quiet courage, of standing where you are without apology. She felt present, fully aware of her body, the sound, the room, and the people listening. She was not performing to impress. She was sharing something true, and that truth resonated deeply. People listened with open expressions. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others watched her hands in quiet admiration. The piano seemed to respond warmly, its sound rich and clear, filling the space without effort. As the piece continued, she felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. The constant pressure to be practical and restrained softened. She allowed herself to exist fully in the moment, without planning what came next. When the final note faded, the response was immediate, and heartfelt applause rose again, stronger than before, not louder but fuller. People stood smiling and nodding. Some approached closer, not to crowd her, but to be near the source of the moment. She stood and bowed again, feeling both humbled and lifted. Her manager met her eyes and gave a clear nod, this time smiling openly. He clapped along with the guests, his earlier uncertainty replaced by understanding. As the evening drew to a close, conversations buzzed with new energy. People spoke about the performance with excitement and gratitude. Some exchanged contact information quietly with the organizer. Others simply expressed thanks as they left. She returned to her tasks one last time, clearing tables and organizing items, but her mind was elsewhere. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope, unsure what the next day would bring, but certain that something meaningful had taken root. When the room finally emptied and the lights dimmed, she stood alone near the piano for a moment, placing her hand gently on its surface. She whispered a quiet thank you, not to the instrument, but to herself for listening to the part of her that had waited so long. She turned off the lights and walked out into the night, carrying more than she had arrived with, carrying possibility, uncertainty, and a renewed sense of self. The music had not changed her life yet, but it had reminded her of who she was, and that reminder was powerful enough to reshape everything that followed. The days after the event passed in a strange blur for her. The routine of her life tried to pull her back into its familiar shape, but something resisted quietly inside her. She returned to work the next morning, wearing the same uniform, moving through the same halls, Yet every step felt different. People greeted her with warmer smiles and curious looks. As if they were seeing her for the first time, she responded politely, unsure how to carry this new attention without losing herself. Word of what had happened spread beyond the hotel. Guests had shared videos and messages, and soon co-workers from other shifts approached her saying they had heard about the night she played. Some spoke with excitement, others with disbelief. She listened without exaggeration or pride, because the moment still felt personal, fragile, and close to her heart. Her manager called her into his office later that week. His tone was calm and respectful. He told her that several guests had reached out asking about the pianist from the event. Some wanted to know her name, others asked if she was available to play at future gatherings. He made it clear that she was under no pressure, and that her job was secure regardless of her choice. He simply wanted her to know that an opportunity had opened. She thanked him and asked for time to think. Walking out of the office, she felt the familiar weight of decisions settle on her shoulders. Opportunity had always come with risk, and risk had never felt safe to her. She had learned to survive by choosing certainty over dreams, but now certainty felt smaller than it once did. At home that evening, she sat quietly in her small apartment. The space was modest, but filled with reminders of who she had been: photos, books, and an old keyboard tucked into the corner under a cloth. She pulled the cloth away and sat down, turning it on. The sound was thinner than a grand piano, but it was enough. She played slowly, letting the notes fill the room. She felt both comforted and challenged by the music, as if it were asking her a question she could no longer ignore. She thought about her mother, and what she might say if she could see her now. She imagined her gentle encouragement and quiet belief that music was never a waste. She felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from longing for approval she realized she had already earned. The following days brought more messages. Some guests contacted the hotel directly, others found her through friends of friends. They spoke of small events, private dinners, charity gatherings, nothing glamorous, nothing guaranteed, just interest, curiosity, and respect. Each message felt like a door opening slightly, waiting for her to decide whether to step through. She struggled with doubt, wondering if one night of music meant anything lasting. She questioned her ability, whether she was good enough, whether time had taken too much from her. She feared being exposed as someone who had peaked in a single moment. She also feared regret, the quiet ache of never knowing what might have been. Her coworkers noticed her distraction and offered gentle support. Some shared stories of dreams they had set aside, others encouraged her to try, reminding her that not all chances needed to lead somewhere to be worth taking. Their honesty helped her feel less alone. One evening after work, she met with the event organizer at a small cafe. The meeting was informal and kind. He spoke openly about how rare the moment had been and how people responded not just to her skill, but to her sincerity. He explained that there was no pressure to change her life overnight, only an invitation to explore where music might fit again. She listened carefully, asking practical questions about time, expectations, and balance. She was not ready to leave her job or take risks she could not manage. He understood and assured her that everything could be approached gradually. That reassurance eased something tight in her chest. They agreed she would play at a small charity dinner the following month. Nothing extravagant, just a chance to share music again in a safe setting. When she left the cafe, the night air felt lighter, and for the first time since the event, she smiled without hesitation. Preparing for the performance became a quiet ritual she practiced in the evenings after work, focusing not on perfection, but connection. She chose pieces that felt honest and manageable, letting her hands grow stronger and her confidence steadier. Each practice session felt like a conversation with herself, rebuilding trust. At work, she continued her duties with care, refusing to let attention change her professionalism. She wanted to honor where she came from, even as she considered where she might go. Her manager respected her approach and supported her schedule, quietly giving her space when needed. As the date of the charity event approached, she felt nerves return, but they were different now, less sharp, more alive. She reminded herself that music did not owe anyone anything. It was something she offered freely, and that thought grounded her. The night of the charity dinner arrived quietly. The venue was smaller, the crowd more relaxed. She arrived early, dressed simply, and took a moment alone at the piano. The room felt welcoming, not intimidating. She placed her hands on the keys and breathed deeply. When she played, the music flowed easily. The audience listened with warmth and appreciation. The experience felt complete in a way that surprised her. She was not chasing applause or validation. She was present, sharing sound and emotion in equal measure. Afterwards, several people thanked her. Some asked if she played often, others simply expressed how the music made them feel. She accepted their words with gratitude without letting them define her worth. Walking home that night, she realized something important. The fear that had once held her back was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned that courage did not mean abandoning stability. It meant allowing space for possibility alongside responsibility. She continued playing at occasional events, balancing work and music carefully. She saved money, adjusted her schedule, and slowly rebuilt a part of her identity she had thought was lost. The journey was not dramatic or fast, but it was real. Each performance strengthened her belief that her story did not have to fit a single mold. She could be many things at once: dependable worker, devoted daughter, and musician, with something meaningful to share. By allowing herself to step forward without rushing, she found a rhythm that felt sustainable and true. The piano was no longer a distant dream. It was a living part of her life again, quietly shaping her future one note at a time. Her future one note at a time. As the weeks passed, her life settled into a new rhythm that felt unfamiliar yet steady. She continued working at the hotel during the day, moving through the same halls. But now she carried a quiet awareness that her world was larger than those walls. Music no longer lived only in memory or stolen moments at night. It had become something present again, something she could plan around and look forward to. She began receiving invitations more regularly. Some were small gatherings, others slightly larger, but all were respectful and understanding of her boundaries. She was careful not to accept too much. She still needed her job and her rest. And the sense of balance she had worked hard to maintain. Saying no was difficult, but she learned that protecting her energy was part of honoring her music. Each performance taught her something new, not about technique, but about people. She noticed how different audiences listened. Some leaned forward, others closed their eyes, some smiled, while others grew quiet and thoughtful. She learned that music met people where they were, and that she did not need to shape it to fit expectations. Her honesty was enough. At the hotel, guests continued to recognize her. Occasionally, some asked politely if she would ever play there again. Others simply smiled with a knowing look. She remained grounded, reminding herself that attention was temporary, but character lasted. She treated every task with the same care she always had, and her coworkers respected her even more for it. One afternoon, a woman approached her in the lobby. The woman introduced herself as a music teacher who had been at the luxury event. She spoke gently and told her that watching her play had moved her deeply. She asked if she had ever considered formal training or mentoring, not as a requirement, but as support. The question stayed with her long after the conversation ended. She had always seen formal training as something she had missed, something no longer meant for her. But the idea of learning again, growing again, sparked curiosity rather than fear. She realized that it was never too late to deepen something you loved. After careful thought, she reached out to the teacher. They met for coffee and talked not just about music, but about life responsibilities and patience. The teacher listened without judgment and offered guidance without pressure. They agreed to begin with occasional lessons focused on technique, confidence, and endurance. The first lesson felt strange. Her fingers knew the keys, but her posture and habits revealed years of playing alone without feedback. She felt vulnerable, making mistakes in front of someone else. Yet the teacher approached each correction with kindness, framing growth as discovery rather than failure. That approach helped her relax and learn. As lessons continued, she noticed subtle improvements. Her hands felt stronger, her playing felt more intentional. She began to understand how to care for her body while playing, how to avoid strain, and how to prepare mentally before performing. These details made a difference, allowing her to play longer with more ease. Her confidence grew slowly, not as loud assurance, but as quiet trust. She trusted that she could walk into a room, sit at a piano, and share something real without needing to prove herself. That trust became her foundation. At the same time, life tested her balance. Unexpected expenses arose, and her work schedule grew heavier. For a time, she felt the familiar pull to retreat to safety, to put music aside again. She considered canceling upcoming performances and lessons to focus solely on survival. One night after a long shift, she sat at her keyboard, unsure whether to play. She felt tired, discouraged, and uncertain. She placed her hands on the keys and began softly. The sound grounded her, reminding her that music was not an extra burden. It was a source of strength that helped her face everything else. She decided to continue even if progress slowed. She adjusted her schedule, reduced performances temporarily, and communicated openly with those involved. The honesty was met with understanding and support, reinforcing her belief that she no longer had to carry everything alone. Over time, she noticed how music changed her outside of performances. She listened more deeply to people. She responded with patience rather than haste. She felt more connected to herself and others. Music had opened her emotionally in ways she had not expected. One evening, she played at a community center event. The audience was diverse: families, elders, children, and volunteers. The setting was simple, but the connection was powerful. Afterward, a young girl approached, her eyes bright, and asked how long it took to learn piano. She smiled and told her that learning never truly ends and that joy matters more than speed. That interaction stayed with her. She realized that by playing, she was not only fulfilling a personal dream, but also quietly encouraging others to believe in their own possibilities. She did not need a grand stage to make an impact. Her teacher suggested recording a few pieces, not for promotion, but for reflection. They recorded in a modest studio space. The experience felt intimate and honest. Listening back, she heard imperfections, but also warmth and sincerity. She accepted both, understanding that authenticity mattered more than polish. As months passed, the memory of the luxury event shifted. It was no longer the defining moment of her story, but the opening of a door. She appreciated it. Without clinging to it, her journey was unfolding through consistent choices rather than sudden change. She continued saving carefully, planning responsibly, and dreaming gently. She imagined a future where music played a larger role, but she did not rush toward it. She trusted that clarity would come with time. Her relationship with her manager and coworkers remained strong. They respected her dedication and supported her flexibility. When possible, she made sure to give back, helping others with shifts and staying reliable. Her integrity remained intact and grounded her progress. Late one night, after returning from a small performance, she sat quietly reflecting on how far she had come. She remembered the woman who once walked past a piano with a heavy heart, afraid to stop. Now she walked toward music with intention and courage. She understood that success did not mean abandoning who she was. It meant expanding without losing balance. It meant honoring both responsibility and passion in equal measure. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer frightened her. She had learned that growth could be steady and gentle, that dreams could coexist with reality without conflict. As she turned off the light and prepared for rest, she felt gratitude for every step taken, and every note played. The music was no longer waiting in silence. It was moving with her, shaping a future built not on spectacle, but on truth and persistence. As another season began, her life continued to evolve in quiet, meaningful ways. She no longer measured time only by work shifts or bills, but also by rehearsals, lessons, and moments of reflection. Music had woven itself into her daily routine, not as an escape, but as a companion that walked beside her through ordinary days. She became more intentional with her choices, learning to listen to her body and emotions. When she felt tired, she rested without guilt. When she felt inspired, she played without hesitation. This balance helped her avoid the exhaustion she once feared and allowed her passion to remain genuine rather than forced. Opportunities continued to appear slowly, and naturally, a local cultural group invited her to participate in a small music evening, celebrating everyday artists from different backgrounds. The idea resonated with her because it reflected her own journey. She agreed and spent weeks preparing, not just musically, but emotionally, reminding herself that her story mattered even if it was quiet. The night of the event, the room was filled with people who had lived full, complicated lives. Teachers, caregivers, workers, and students gathered not for prestige, but for connection. When she sat at the piano, she felt calm, grounded, and present. She played pieces that reflected resilience, patience, and hope. The response was warm and deeply human. Conversations afterward were thoughtful and sincere, and she felt seen, not admired, but understood. After that evening, more invitations followed. Some were unpaid, some offered modest compensation. She accepted, selectively choosing experiences that aligned with her values. She learned that saying yes with intention was more powerful than saying yes to everything. Her lessons with the teacher deepened beyond technique. They spoke about interpretation, pacing, and emotional honesty. They discussed how silence between notes could be as meaningful as sound, and how music carried the weight of lived experience. These conversations enriched her playing and her understanding of herself. She also began mentoring informally. A coworker asked if she could show her teenage son a few basics on the keyboard. She agreed, and discovered a new kind of fulfillment in guiding someone else, watching him struggle, then succeed. Reminded her of her own early days, and reinforced her belief that growth came from patience rather than pressure. At work, her role remained the same, but her perspective shifted. She noticed how many people around her carried unspoken dreams. Some coworkers shared stories during late shifts about what they once wanted or still hoped for. She listened without judgment and shared her own journey honestly, not as inspiration, but as proof that change could begin quietly. Financial challenges still arose, as they always had. She faced them with the same responsibility, but now with greater resilience. Music had not solved her problems, but it had strengthened her ability to face them. She budgeted carefully, planned realistically, and avoided risky decisions, trusting that slow progress was still progress. One afternoon, she received a message from a small local radio program that focused on community stories. They had heard about her through a listener, and asked if she would be willing to speak about her experience and perhaps play briefly live. She hesitated, knowing that visibility brought vulnerability, but she also recognized the opportunity to share her story on her own terms. She agreed with clear boundaries. The interview was simple and respectful. She spoke about balancing work and passion, about fear and courage, and about how one unexpected moment reminded her of who she was. The host listened attentively and allowed her words space. When she played a short piece, the studio felt intimate and calm. After the broadcast, messages arrived from listeners. Some thanked her for expressing feelings they could not put into words. Others shared their own stories of postponed dreams. She read each message slowly, feeling connected to people she had never met. Music had become a bridge rather than a spotlight. As her confidence grew, she revisited an old idea she had once dismissed. She considered reducing her work hours slightly to allow more time for music. The thought scared her, but she approached it practically. She calculated expenses, saved consistently, and waited until she felt secure before making any change. When she finally spoke to her manager, he responded with understanding. He appreciated her honesty and valued her contribution. He agreed to a reduced schedule that allowed flexibility while maintaining stability. The arrangement was not perfect, but it was workable, and it felt like a step forward taken with care. With more time, she focused on building stamina and exploring new pieces. She challenged herself musically. Without rushing, the piano became a place of exploration rather than expectation. She allowed mistakes and learned from them without harsh judgment. She also began journaling, reflecting on performances, emotions, and lessons learned. Writing helped her process experiences and recognize patterns. She noticed how fear often appeared before growth, and how calm followed acceptance. This awareness guided her choices and kept her grounded. One evening, after a long practice session, she realized something important. She no longer played to prove anything, she played to connect to herself and others. This shift changed everything. It freed her from comparison and allowed her to experience joy without conditions. As months passed, she performed at a variety of settings: libraries, small halls, community centers, and private homes. Each space taught her something new. She adapted her playing to the room, the people, and the moment. She learned to read energy and respond with sensitivity. Her reputation grew slowly through word of mouth. People described her playing as sincere and moving, rather than impressive. She welcomed that description because it aligned with her values. She did not want to dazzle, she wanted to touch something real. There were still moments of doubt. Late at night, she sometimes questioned whether she was doing enough or risking too much. In those moments, she returned to the piano and played quietly, letting sound replace thought. Music reminded her that certainty was not required to move forward. She also honored rest, spending time with friends, cooking simple meals, and enjoying silence. These moments nourished her creativity and prevented burnout. She learned that inspiration thrived in balance rather than excess. Looking back, she saw how far she had come from the night she first sat at the piano in the ballroom. That moment had opened a door, but it was her daily choices that carried her through it. She had built a path with patience, courage, and honesty. Her journey was not complete, and she did not expect it to be. She understood now that growth was ongoing, and that fulfillment came from alignment rather than achievement. As she prepared for another small performance, she felt gratitude, not for applause or recognition, but for the chance to live more fully. Music had not changed who she was, it had revealed her more clearly. She walked forward with steady steps, carrying responsibility and passion side by side, confident not in outcomes, but in her ability to listen, adapt, and continue. The piano remained her companion, and together they moved into the future, one intentional moment at a time. As time continued to pass, she noticed a deeper change taking shape within her. It was not something others could easily see, but it influenced every choice she made. She had begun to trust herself in a way she never had before. Trust not just in her abilities, but in her instincts and limits. This trust became the quiet strength behind everything she did. Music was no longer something she fit into her life, it was woven into how she understood the world. When she listened to people speak, she noticed rhythm and pauses. When she walked through the city, she heard patterns in footsteps and traffic. Even silence felt different now, fuller and more intentional. One afternoon, she received an invitation that made her pause. A regional cultural foundation was organizing an event, highlighting everyday artists whose work grew outside traditional paths. They had heard her play at a community venue and wanted her to participate alongside poets, painters, and storytellers. The event was not about fame or competition, but about shared experience. The idea resonated deeply with her. She took time before responding. Sitting at her keyboard, she played slowly, letting the decision unfold naturally. She realized that earlier in her life she might have declined out of fear or self-doubt. Now, she felt curiosity more than fear. She accepted, knowing that whatever came of it would be part of her growth. Preparing for the event pushed her creatively. She chose pieces that reflected her journey, moments of uncertainty, patience, loss, and renewal. She practiced with intention, focusing on tone and presence rather than difficulty. She wanted her music to speak honestly without hiding behind complexity. The day of the event arrived quietly. The venue was an old, renovated hall filled with natural light. The atmosphere felt open and welcoming. Artists greeted one another with mutual respect. There was no hierarchy, only shared purpose. She felt at ease among them, sensing that everyone carried their own story of persistence. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano without rush. She acknowledged the audience with a gentle nod and sat down, placing her hands on the keys. She took a breath and began. The music flowed steadily, grounded and expressive. It carried weight without heaviness and hope without exaggeration. She played as someone who had lived and learned, and continued to learn. The audience listened attentively, not because they were impressed, but because they felt invited into something genuine. As she played, she felt a sense of alignment that was new and powerful. Her thoughts were quiet, her movements were natural. She was not performing an identity, she was simply being present, and that presence filled the room. After she finished, the response was warm and thoughtful. People approached her not with praise alone, but with conversation. They spoke about moments in the music that reminded them of their own lives. Their reflections mattered more to her than applause because they showed connection rather than admiration. During the rest of the event, she listened to others share their work. She felt inspired by the courage it took to create without guarantees. She recognized parts of herself in each story and felt less alone in her path. In the weeks that followed the event, she noticed a shift in how she approached opportunities. She became clearer about what aligned with her values and what did not. She declined offers that felt rushed or transactional and accepted those that allowed space for authenticity. This clarity brought peace even when it meant earning less or waiting longer. She also noticed how her confidence influenced those around her. Coworkers began asking more openly about her music journey. Some shared that seeing her pursue something meaningful alongside responsibility gave them courage to revisit their own interests. She listened and encouraged without positioning herself as an example. She knew each path was personal. Her mentoring efforts grew quietly. She began offering small informal sessions at a local community center, teaching basics to beginners of all ages. She approached teaching the same way she approached playing, with patience, warmth, and respect. Watching others discover sound for the first time filled her with joy. She saw herself reflected in their curiosity and hesitation. One evening after a session, an older woman stayed behind and thanked her. She said she had always wanted to learn, but felt it was too late. Hearing this, she smiled gently and told her that music did not measure worth by age. That moment stayed with her, reinforcing the impact of simply showing up authentically. Her relationship with her teacher evolved into one of mutual respect. They discussed not only technique but artistic identity. The teacher encouraged her to explore composition not for recognition, but for expression. The idea intrigued her. She began experimenting, creating simple pieces drawn from memory and emotion. The process felt vulnerable but freeing. Composing allowed her to articulate feelings she had never named. She played with patterns, repetition, and silence, letting the music grow organically. She did not judge the results. She treated each piece as a conversation rather than a product. As she continued this exploration, she recorded a few of her original pieces at home. Listening back, she heard honesty more than perfection. She accepted that as success. Life continued with its usual demands. Unexpected challenges arose, both financial and personal. There were days when exhaustion returned and doubt resurfaced. But now she met those moments differently. She acknowledged them without letting them define her. She leaned on her support network and allowed herself rest when needed. She also allowed herself joy without guilt. Small joys like cooking a favorite meal, walking in the early morning light, or playing without an agenda. These moments nourished her creativity and kept her grounded. One particularly quiet evening, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the woman who once walked past a piano afraid to stop. She felt compassion for that version of herself, understanding the fear and responsibility that shaped her choices. She honored her for surviving and for eventually choosing courage. She realized that her story was not about transformation into someone else. It was about uncovering who she had always been beneath layers of caution and expectation. This realization brought deep peace. As her performances continued, she noticed how audiences responded not to technical display, but to emotional truth. She embraced that understanding and let it guide her future choices. She no longer chased milestones. She focused on presence. There was talk of organizing a small collaborative project with other artists from the cultural event. A series of intimate gatherings combining music, storytelling, and conversation. The idea excited her. She saw it as a natural extension of her journey, rooted in community rather than ambition. She agreed to participate, knowing it would require time, coordination, and patience. She approached it thoughtfully, balancing commitments and communicating clearly. This approach helped her maintain stability while embracing growth. Through all of this, she remained grounded in her daily life. She continued working responsibly, nurturing relationships, and caring for herself. She understood now that sustainability mattered more than speed. Her confidence was no longer loud or fragile. It was steady and resilient. It allowed her to adapt without losing direction. Looking ahead, she felt neither urgency nor fear. She felt readiness, not for a specific outcome, but for continued growth. She trusted that as long as she listened, remained honest, and moved intentionally, she would find her way. Music had become both anchor and compass, guiding her through uncertainty with quiet strength. She walked forward with gratitude for the journey so far and openness to what lay ahead, grounded in the knowledge that her voice mattered simply because it was true. In the years that followed, she no longer thought of her life as divided into before and after one unexpected night. Instead, she saw it as a continuous unfolding, shaped by many small brave choices. Each day carried its own meaning, and she met it with calm intention, trusting the rhythm she had learned to follow. The collaborative gatherings with other artists became a steady part of her life. They were held in modest spaces where people sat close, listened carefully, and spoke honestly. Music stories and shared silence flowed together naturally. She often opened these evenings at the piano not as a featured performer, but as a guide setting a tone of openness and respect. The response was never overwhelming, but it was sincere, and that sincerity mattered most. Through these gatherings, she formed lasting friendships with people who valued depth over attention. They shared meals, ideas, and encouragement, supporting one another through uncertainty and creative doubt. This sense of community strengthened her resolve, reminding her that art did not need approval from distant audiences to be meaningful. Her original compositions grew slowly. Each piece reflected a season of her life: patience, struggle, acceptance, renewal. She did not rush to share them widely. Instead, she played them when the moment felt right, trusting her instincts. The pieces evolved over time, just as she did, changing slightly with each performance. Teaching continued to bring her quiet fulfillment. She watched students of different ages approach the piano with hesitation and hope. She offered them more than instruction. She offered permission to try, to fail, and to continue. This role grounded her, reminding her that the value of music extended far beyond performance. Her work at the hotel eventually shifted. She took on fewer shifts as her financial stability improved through careful planning and modest income from music. She never felt the need to make a dramatic exit. Instead, she transitioned with gratitude, honoring the place that had supported her through years of growth. Her manager congratulated her sincerely, acknowledging her integrity and dedication. Leaving that job felt symbolic, but not dramatic. She walked out on her last day with the same calm presence she had carried in. She knew that her worth had never been tied to a title, but to how she showed up in every role she held. Life continued to offer challenges, as it always would. There were moments of loss, disappointment, and fatigue, but she faced them with resilience, shaped by self-trust and support. She no longer retreated from difficulty. She met it with honesty, allowing space for emotion without letting it define her. Music remained her constant companion. Sometimes it was expressive and full, sometimes it was quiet and reflective. She learned that both were necessary and valuable. She allowed herself to play without purpose when needed, trusting that creativity thrived in freedom. She also allowed herself to rest, embracing stillness without guilt. Long walks, mornings spent reading, and evenings shared with friends nourished her as deeply as music. These moments balanced her life and protected her joy. Looking back, she understood that the night she played at the luxury event was not a miracle, but an invitation she accepted, not all at once, but gradually, through courage, patience, and care. That understanding kept her grounded and grateful. She often thought about how many people carried hidden talents and unspoken dreams. She hoped that her story encouraged others, not through spectacle, but through honesty. She believed that change did not require dramatic leaps, only willingness to listen to oneself. As time passed, she became less concerned with defining success. She measured it instead by alignment, by how closely her actions matched her values. She felt successful when she lived with intention, treated others with respect, and honored her inner voice. Music gave her language for emotions that once felt overwhelming. It allowed her to process life with clarity and compassion. Through it, she learned to forgive herself for past choices made from necessity rather than fear. She recognized her younger self as strong, resourceful, and deserving of kindness. One quiet evening, after a small gathering, she stayed behind alone at the piano. The room was empty and warm. She played softly, letting the notes linger. She felt a deep sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she was present and whole. She realized that fulfillment did not arrive as a final destination. It existed in moments like this, in connection, authenticity, and self-respect. That realization felt like a gift she could carry forward indefinitely. As she closed the piano and prepared to leave, she felt gratitude for the journey, not just the highlights, but every step that shaped her. She walked forward without needing certainty, trusting that as long as she listened and stayed true, she would continue to grow. Her life did not become extraordinary in the way stories often promise. It became meaningful, and that was enough. The crowd once could not believe their ears, but she had learned to believe in herself, and that belief became the quiet foundation of everything that followed. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. These appear, rewrite the content without them.